Welcome to the Condor DM Show special. Now, you know my specials and my out of order. Sometimes I start a bit early. I have a ton of content to go through tonight. That won't start until we're at the 9 o'clock, right? For now, I'm opening up a bit early just to give you some heads up, right? About what you should expect tonight. And maybe give people a minute to roll in before I totally start in on the main material that you'll be here to take from me. Now, here's what I promise on these type of specials, these focuses all year round. Here's my promise to you. Everything I tell you is going to be based on facts. Okay? So I'm going to make claims over a subject, give it a title, and then I'm going to give you only facts to support it. Now, when I state my opinion, I'm going to make sure I put my best foot forward, communicating that this is my opinion separate from the facts. But what I promise you this is, I won't let my opinion run an agenda. I won't deceive you about the facts or the information. I'll say things that go against what I believe in, maybe even strongly push back on it in a way I don't like. But I'll be real with you. I promise you that. And that's what 2026 is going to be all about, real for me. Real facts here, because I see discussions out there. I sometimes feel like people aren't well informed about some things. And I figure, well, if a conversation is stalled or in a bad place for a long time, sometimes just more information gets people to progress on that discussion, that dialogue, that talk. So we're going to do that, right? Tonight, I'll give you the subjects. So here's what we're doing. Here's what I'm talking about tonight. Chainmail, this is the opener. Chainmail is not Dungeons and Dragons. This is a response to some of the Bro OSR members that I've seen lately making a case about chainmail being Dungeons and Dragons. Now, I think the facts personally say something against that as far as, what the company, what Gary would want. And my own opinion actually agrees with Gary, even though I don't agree with all of Gary's opinions that he's had, that he had, over his lifetime. I'm not a bow the knee to Gary, but this is one area I agree with him on. But I'll say this, there's nothing wrong with you having an opinion that simply states that you think this is whatever this is. You might disagree with Gary or the company. Maybe somehow you see something there they personally weren't aiming to put into the game. So if you say it's chainmail, all right, make your case, fair enough. But I'm going to say it's not chainmail, and what I'm going to do on each one of these, like I said earlier, it's a claim at the top, and I give you nothing but facts to back up whatever that area is. So tonight we start off with chainmail is not Dungeons and Dragons, and then we're going to go into original Dungeons and Dragons, what it was. Then we're going to go into original Dungeons and Dragons, what it did better. Yeah. Original I wouldn't be able to do it justice without really just acknowledging almost the branching piece of it during the evolution to AD&D. I almost feel like, in a way, when you talk about OD&D, you got to talk about basic at the same time. I think that's a package. I don't think basic is another addition. I think original, or just D&D, the beginning piece, was an experiment Frankenstein of something put together, right? I think the experiment just kept going on with basic, but not in a way of a new addition, just taking what you have and keep trying new stuff, right? And I figure that's almost like a mutation of OD&D in many ways. And it's the mutation where it's like at the end of that, you get AD&D. Just my take, but I'll make a case. So I'll cover basic D&D. Now I'll cover something interesting about basic D&D, something very popular. When I was younger, there's a very popular thing I could remember really sticking out to me. Something that really attracted me to wanting to have the experience. And that was playing the basic, you start a character and you play up to a god. Oh, yeah, they really had this. They had this whole series where you could play up to godhood, right? And basic D&D. And it was so beautifully put together and packaged and so attractive, right? And when I finally seen it being done, it was pretty good. It attracted me to basic D&D. This is why I have my experience with basic D&D. Now I want to show off my knowledge tonight of this stuff. Let my fellow nerds know, hey, it's real. I know all this stuff. I've done it all. I'm going to show off some real good knowledge tonight that might surprise you. And it's because when I say I was really active during the old school, I'm not joking. I started playing or acknowledging the hobby and reading about it when I was around 6 years of age. Yes, I can barely remember, but I can remember. It's almost like flashes in my mind. And my family said, yeah, I was already reading books that other family members had that were Dungeons and Dragons. This was in 1986 because I was born in 1980. In 1987, I became a serious player. I remember that time really well. It sticks out to me, at least my gaming time. Not every bit of that age, but my gaming time sticks out to me. I have a lot of memories that come from what I did over that year. And I gamed right up until 1991 and became a DM. And during that time, I played every edition there was in Dungeons and Dragons. When I started DMing, I started with second edition, but in reality, I went. I knew I had to. I ran the original. I ran basic. I went up and ran AD&D 1, first edition, for a while. And then I went back to second edition because I figured I'd give the others a fair shot to see what I could learn from them. And I learned stuff from running those other editions and playing them. But I felt after taking the package of lessons that it was best served to me with second edition with the lessons carried over. Where I have to admit, second edition dropped some very valuable things in the process of trying to adjust the game to a more general crowd. Yes, I admit, as a second edition person, I never deny. I feel second edition on purpose does do some watering down of the themes or stuff like that. Personally, I just never felt it watered down the gameplay. I liked the gameplay of second edition. So that was the part where I just said, like, look, even if I feel their content is watered down, I can just do whatever I want. So I'm old school in the sense of I did a lot less commercial and module stuff and did a lot of homebrewed stuff during my time. Okay, so we're going to talk about, from start character to godhood. Then we're going to move on to OD&D and basic and why. Because some people really don't understand why this is or even agree with it. But I say the facts really back it up. Why the game was created for not using miniatures, but making them optional. But we know what not using miniatures in these games are. There's really two ways of approaching a tabletop role-playing game. And that's either purely in your imagination or the use of an outside source mixed so it can help you instead of depending just on your own mind to do all the work of where you are, where you might be standing. It provides you information that you don't have to worry about. I say the more you use your imagination, the better improves your memory. People will notice this the more they use it. That's my experience, and I've had a lot of people say that's true for them too. Either way, it's optional to use miniatures or paper to draw something out. But the game was made for pure theater of the mind, and there was a reason. Very important financial barrier, but there were other reasons for it too. And we'll go into it. That will be a short area. And then we'll go into complaints about basic and original. Now, I have counters to each one of these complaints. And then we're going to move on to some serious areas of gaming that I want to give you Gary's opinion and TSR's opinion overall of character death. So, was there a debate back in the old school in the way that you hear about character death debated or argued today? I want to go over that and give you the facts. What about player versus player? Well, how did Gary and TSR look at that overall? I want to give you the facts. I want to go into another area, very important one, alignment. I want to give you the facts. In these areas, I don't really personally have claims. It's not something I'm claiming anything here. I just want to go at these subjects like character death is more like not me claiming whatever I think of it. This is going to be the topic. Here are the facts of that comes out from that timeline and these people, what they think on it. And everything I say to you tonight will check out. I promise you. Okay, we're at that time, right? But the last couple of things I'll cover to finish the night off is from TSR to OSR. And then I'm going to talk about the OSR upgrade, where I talk about original and basic being redone in the OSR era. I'm going to cover two of the games that redo them to give people some idea of what the OSR started as, what it's really meant to be. And I think these two examples cover both editions, basic and original, even though I think they're somewhat close together. Either way, it covers both of them. And you can see that from the OSR era. Remember, a lot of this is to teach you stuff. Now, I got an upcoming stream where I'm going to do the same rundown I've done for all this material for second edition. I will package this content up into some playlist later. So it will be the whole rundown, everything old school, from the realms, the worlds, everything that I'm covering for second edition, but also these special streams where I cover old school and just TSR and Gary's opinions in general, right? I think these are, to me, they're really, really, really important things, and I just want to get them right because I know you guys, the people that take the time to listen to these, want to make sure I'm getting the facts right. Let's start what chainmail was and what it wasn't. Chainmail 1971, designed by Gary Gygax and Jeff Perrin. Chainmail was a miniatures war game designed for mass combat, based on medieval troop units, later supplemented with fantasy supplement. That fantasy supplement included wizards, heroes, superheroes, dragons, elementals, but here's the key. It was still a battlefield simulation game. Even the fantasy section was structured around movement rates, unit combat tables, figure scale, the scale of the figure. It was not character focused, campaign driven, role play centered. That leap came later. Gary's shift. D&D becomes its own category. By this time, you reach Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master Guide. Gary is clearly distancing D&D from wargaming. Gary, in the AD&D 1E Dungeon Master Guide, in the foreword and introduction, he makes it clear AD&D is a complete game system. It is not dependent on chainmail. It was never intended to be in any overall serious way. Even original, when you look at it, they had rules for just doing the overall game or optional rules. And optional, I don't ignore that miniatures or something in that vein or wargaming had enough influence to be an optional piece of what we were doing. But overall, that goes away as he advances, and you see it. We're going to get more into it. So it is not dependent on chainmail. It is structured for campaign play, and it is not simply a miniature variant. It's very important. He states it very clearly that AD&D is designed to standardize tournament and campaign play, something war games do not do in that way. Gary on Dungeons & Dragons not being a war game, Gary repeatedly stated in interviews in the 1980s onward that D&D grew from wargaming roots, but it became something different. It was a fantasy role-playing game. Very important. Not a miniature war game. He resisted labeling it purely narrative, but he also rejected calling it a war game. Dungeons & Dragons emerged from miniature rules, but it is a role-playing game, not a tabletop battle simulation. That's the important pivot. The focus of this game overall is still the overall role-playing. Like from how it's not just that you are simulating some combat, but it's how do you interact with the combat outside of rolling some dice. There is an expectation that flavor is dealt into the game without experience points given out because it is the central piece of what you're doing is somewhat playing a role in character, but the idea is you're playing a role in all senses. You might be the leader. All right, you got to say the right words. All right, what about the guard getting across the thing? He might not let you cross unless you say the right thing to him. That's nothing to do with simulating big battle wars. That's what Dungeons & Dragons is, in my opinion. The miniatures question. What was actually mandated? This is where precision, in my opinion, matters to you. Because I'm making a claim that some people might be sensitive to, so I better get the facts right here. And I will. Original Dungeons & Dragons, 1974. OD&D suggested using chainmail, but it assumed you might use miniatures. But even there, it included the alternate D20 system. But even that alternate system is critical. It allowed combat resolution without chainmail, without miniatures, using abstract positioning. That's the seed of theater of the mind. That's the pure theater of the mind right there. It's playing without, it's simply just playing without those options. And old school, more people played without those options than played with them. Again, from what I know from my own life experiences, miniatures becomes extremely popular when they became affordable. When they became affordable was during the time of 3rd edition. And you can thank WotC for making plastic miniatures and made miniatures more affordable for more people to use. And if you note, WotC's game was more tailored towards not being shy about leaning into miniature use as it's making them affordable. You know, yeah, you see people using pieces of paper or some coins or something, but it was never a big focus of what we were doing. A lot of people in my own, at least in my experience, even the people I talked to online had the same experience. I wasn't running into people that had an alternative experience to what I personally had. You know, I'm just saying is we didn't use miniatures. It was quite common for theater of the mind, purely to be what was ran at a table. So when I got online, I met a lot of people that did pure theater of the mind still, right? And there were many programs that were quite popular because you could do that because their miniature section was so bad that even trying to use it was no good, right? But there'd be thousands of people on playing because you still do it here, right? And, when I first came on before 3rd edition hit, 2nd edition was very popular online during the early years of attempted programs and whatnot for us doing this gimmick. I was there for that too, the early years of the internet world, even though I took part in a lot of real life stuff. But that is the seed. It's having that D20 combat resolution that does not require those things. It's so important. Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition, were miniatures required? No. In fact, Gary states clearly in 1E, miniatures are helpful. They clarify positioning. They are not mandatory. The rules are written to function without them. So if that's where I tell you, I make the case that pure theater of the mind is simply mandatory because you either play with miniatures or you don't. And if you don't, if that is the overall, hey, this other way is optional, but we're not saying it's optional with this. Like if you don't do this, you're doing this, right? Well, that means that other piece is mandatory because it's not talked about as optional to do it without the stuff. It's talked about either you're doing it this way or you can help yourself here, is the way the game is explaining it to you as optional on the side. So mandated to old school is that. We'll go a little bit more into that in a bit, but there's a lot more I'm getting into here. Movement and distance are described in inches, Wargame Legacy, but convertible to feet. However, nothing in 1E mandates gridded play, figure placement, tactical board mapping. Combat resolution is fully table driven. You can run initiative, melee, missile fire, spellcasting, saving throws, all in pure descriptive space, pure theater of the mind. So just to say, that's again, this can help you if you want it to, if you're having such a hard time. But in reality, there's so many people that can do this. You could see why the game, the designers later, especially with second edition, get more comfortable with the fact that most people, at least at the time, given the financial cost of miniatures back then, because they were made of metal and such, most people were doing what I was doing, and most people around me were doing what I was doing. It wasn't most people played with miniatures, right? Again, that's something I seen come later into the hobby as a regular thing where it starts becoming a regular thing amongst watch-see gaming groups, right? And of course, older groups pick up miniatures as they become more affordable. So there's a lot of old school guys that could probably tell you they started digging a lot more into miniatures and their options, maybe at one point. Some guys at Wargame, they've had exceptions over there. They had miniatures, but even they would admit quite costly. The idea that the casual person in any way could afford that is, in my opinion, cuckoo. Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Second Edition Player's Handbook. Second Ed continues the same stance. Miniatures are optional. Tactical aids are helpful. Theater of the mind works perfectly fine. TSR never mandated. Again, even with this edition, gridded combat, battle maps, miniature usage. Even TSR's own miniature line were accessories. They weren't called required tools. Right? So they had their own line at one point of selling miniatures. That's true. But you would think, well, okay, if they're necessary for the game, you don't make them accessories that are not necessary, so that they're not tools in that way. And a lot of people would get, I said this when I talked about miniatures, because I just seen this happen so many times. We would not play with miniatures, but I don't know how many people would show up with a miniature to say, look at my cool miniature, or look at my character, and I get the miniature for it, right? Or something they painted. So I explained in the miniature thing, it was already started being a subculture hobby of painting and people collecting miniatures, but it was just so costly that the average table wouldn't have miniatures to game with. So you're just stuck to playing with theater of mind. It's not much of an option unless you're using some chips or a piece of paper. Some people use those things too. Basic stuff. Chainmail is a war game. D&D is a campaign engine. By AD&D, Gary wasn't writing writing for battlefield generals. He was writing for dungeon referees. Miniatures were convenience. Imagination was the requirement. Pure theater of the mind, all up here, right? That's a requirement, right? You can play without the figure. You can't play without the imagination. So that's, to me, imagination simply is just theater of the mind. You do it while you use miniatures, or you do pure theater of the mind, which is basically just, hey, now you're doing it all here, and you don't use any side things, to assist you, right? You do it based on maybe notes, memory, whatnot for a lot of things. TSR D&D never required a grid. The only mandatory component was a referee, a dungeon master. Theater of the Mind isn't modern rediscovery. It was the default for TSR. So there's a lot of people. I just because I've heard so many people act like the old school was all miniature war game. I'm like, that's not. That's at least not what I experienced. That's not even what the company experienced. It's not even the expectation of the company. They knew that wasn't going to be the case, and they were right. They were actually right on this, right? I met a lot of people out there that would be their customers, and yeah, the company's right because they wouldn't know what chainmail was. They wouldn't know none of this stuff. If you meet a lot of strangers in the hobby that you're willing to run a game for, right? I did that as a public game master. And I met just so many people where it's a repeated experience where, yeah, there's a minority of guys that are like me. They have a passion for the hobby. And then there's the majority of people that, I mean, it takes time to build a passion, right? So they're all going to be in that average zone for a while. Just saying. Okay. The real transition. The ship looks like this. Era, relationship to chainmail. 1971, chainmail is a mass combat war game. 1974, D&D grows out of it, but still reference it. 1975 to 1976, supplement expands beyond war game logic. So before AD&D, Gary is already ran away from it. So he's saying this is not that, right? I can't take the action any other way. So this is just after D&D comes out. They're going to expand, moving further away from that, from the roots. Again, it's like we got an idea from this, inspired from what we did over here, but it's not what we did over here, right? There's elements, but it's not what we did. 1977 to 1979, AD&D formalizes Dungeons and Dragons as a separate, its own category. It doesn't identify as wargaming, AD&D 1. It doesn't identify as drama class. It identifies as a very unique thing, all on its own for what it is. That's it. It's not wargaming. It's not chainmail. 1980s TSR D&D fully independent of miniatures system. So, I mean, the system is so leaning on theater of the mind being the safe bet that everyone has the option to, because not everybody has miniatures. They lean heavy into it. The options for miniatures are still there, but the game does act like you probably won't be using them. And you can tell that if you read through second edition. At least that's my personal opinion. I say my experience was it just wasn't so concerned with miniatures. Like it had an expectation that you're probably going to not have them to use them. So the game was given to you as if, hey, we understand your situation. We have built the game around the only thing you got to do is buy the books and have your dice. Well, cool. I can handle that shit. Fair is fair, right? By 1E, chainmail is no longer required. It is historically relevant, not mechanically necessary. So it's relevant to the roots of D&D, but what it is not necessary to what D&D is. Gary never denied the wargaming roots. He was proud of them. But he was very clear that D&D evolved into a role-playing game, a campaign structure, a referee-focused experience, not a miniature tactics simulator. He wanted D&D recognized as its own thing. That's why AD&D was created, to formalize, to standardize, to separate from loose OD&D interpretations, and yes, to separate legally from artisan. But on the level of philosophy, it was also about identity. He didn't want this just to be another war game. He thought, in my opinion, the hints out there is he felt like that was pigeonholing a game that could have a much bigger audience. I think in time it has proven him right. There is a bigger audience for this. Not saying there's anything wrong with wargaming or the people that love doing it. And there's plenty of them, right? But in reality, what we do with tabletop role-playing games, if pitched out in the right way, as we can see, as we have seen, the vast majority of people will be attracted to what we do here. A much bigger market. It's very wise for them to sort of understand that. So, no, chainmail was not that. Chainmail gave D&D its skeleton, but by AD&D, Gary had given it its organs. It was alive, and it didn't need a battlefield to breathe. Very important. It was alive, and it didn't need a battlefield to breathe. You can play here. Just saying. That's why I personally make the case that no, bro OSR guys, before you push this one too deeply, I personally think the facts work against you. Just saying. Okay. What original Dungeons and Dragons actually was. OD&D was a fantasy supplement grown into a standalone game built directly out of chainmail. Written primarily by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson, published by TSR in 1974. It assumed you already owned chainmail, and you were comfortable with the way the rules were adjudicated in a war game. The rule stack, understanding certain things. You understood miniatures and war game logic overall. So there's an expectation that you might have gotten here, because of your interest around that, or maybe your experience with it. There's an early expectation that it's almost like, in my opinion, early on, overall, they don't see the bigger market right away. I think it does come later, but it's early on. I think they start leaning into, there's something, we got people here already. Let's aim at the people we at least know, because this is, remember, you're putting something out and you don't know. It's all an experiment. The first go is this a thing? You don't even know if you're making a thing. Yeah. Just saying. So it assumed you already owned chainmail, you were comfortable with the way they did their rules in that type of gaming with miniatures, and you understood war game logic. It did not assume a unified core mechanic, tight balance, clear, understanding, protocol. It did not assume fully explained systems. So this is the earliest form of whatever this is, Dungeons and Dragons. OD&D is closer to a referee's notebook than a finished modern game. Yeah, you can see the gaps in it, but they're I'll explain some of the stuff later. Arneson's role, the Blackmore Breakthrough. Dave Arneson ran a campaign called Blackmore in the early 1970s. His breakthroughs, individual player characters instead of army units. So he starts doing the whole play. You play an individual person instead of like a unit or a military group, like a war game. He starts seeing it in this different way. Persistent campaign worlds. Experience points for treasure earned by the characters. Open-ended problem solving. How do we deal with the traps in this weird dungeon place that we've gone to, right? Role-playing personalities instead of moving counters. You start developing who the character is, right? They become somebody. This was a radical shift from wargaming. You're moving, that's a board game. I'm not trying to, I know you can have a deeper look and role play and wargame. I'm not saying you can't do none of that. And some people actually do stuff like that. So I don't want to take that away from anyone or say it's not happening. But it's definitely very effective. And this was an early step far away from wargaming. And here's Dave Arneson having a completely different view. He's altering the thing so far away that even before you get D&D, D&D is not chainmail. This was a radical shift from wargaming. Radical. Dungeons and Dragons wasn't invented as a board game. It was invented when someone zoomed in on one soldier and never zoomed back out. That zoom in moment is Arneson. That's so deep to what it becomes. He focuses on one character instead of like a unit group military thing. And then he says, what would you do with one person instead of a group? Well, you wouldn't be doing war game stuff. One guy could go into a dungeon. Okay, one guy can do it. This is where the reasoning starts developing, the actions which start developing through common sense, Dungeons and Dragons as we know it. It's huge. Gygax's role, systemizing the chaos. Gygax took Arneson's freeform campaign style and organized it, structured it, published it. Gygax was a war game designer, procedural thinker, obsessed with consistency. His writing style in AD&D, dense, assumptive, authoritative. Sometimes unclear, but his philosophy was consistent, and it was. The referee is the final arbiter. AD&D empowered the referee above the rules. You don't need a rule lawyer. The DM calls the shots. The mindset carries through TSR for decades. It was true still when I came in second edition. The mindset was still DM overall authority, even over the book. The 30% was where you could somewhat play rule lawyer, but it was honestly, I never seen DMs lean outside of the basic dungeon rules and stuff like that. I mean, you could forget to do something, but that's more like an accident, not a DM trying to not do the basic frame of what we do here. But I mean, yeah, I'm just saying. What AD&D gameplay actually looked like. Core assumptions. 3 classes. Fighting man, magic user, cleric. 3 races. Men, elves, dwarves. Alignment, law versus chaos. Natural, later clarified. Right? Not at this point. Hit dice by class. Saving throws by category. Combat derived still from chainmail, or, and that's optional, or the mandatory, if you don't use that optional use, the alternate D20 tables for pure theater of the mind. So you can resolve combat without the figurines. Here's the kicker. AD&D includes 2 combat systems, like I said, chainmail based, alternate D20 method. That split tells you everything. The game was mid-evolution. They lean into this, but there's a hang on to something, right? It's like a leftover. It's one that is leaning a little bit more to the wargamey roots, but it is one overall abandoned. I think the facts say that clearly. And very quickly, too, a realization we will not be able to sell the game under these conditions with a system that mandates that you have these type of miniature figurines from wargaming. So you can either have the wargaming somewhat rules with the miniatures, or most likely you're using the D20. In my opinion, when I came into the hobby, more people do it here. Just saying. Gygax on what D&D was. Gygax repeatedly said D&D was not just wargaming, but he also resisted calling it pure storytelling. So he wouldn't call it wargaming, but he wouldn't call it storytelling. To him, it was a game of skill. This is very true. A game of risk management, a game of challenge. He leaned heavily on player, thoughtfulness, creativity, resource depletion as a challenge, referee rulings over written rules. Remember, 70% DM can override. This is a mindset of what I say, 30% mandate, boom, the rest you can do what you want. D&D wasn't about telling a story. It was about surviving one. So you're there to play a game and survive whatever you're doing. Hence, emergent storytelling it's like going up for that walk. You're not going up for a walk to tell a story, but wild shit could happen to you on the walk. Next thing you know, you got an interesting story to tell that has emerged from your action of going out the door to do something. And that's the idea here. When we come to play D&D, I still think if people really realize what they're doing, they're coming to play a game. That's the mindset. You're there to beat the monster, get the treasure. There's still basic things you're there to do in that game mentality. Because at the end of the day, this is still a game, even if unique. Right? Arneson's angle. Arneson was looser, more about improvising, more theatrical. He leaned towards narrative evolution, player creativity more than Gary did. Situation over structure. You could frame it like this. If Arneson lit the fire, Gary built the furnace. How could I say? Arneson would teach you how to naturally do stuff and how the role play, the interaction, the talking monsters down, that's more leaning to Dave Arneson and his view of what this was. So when we say it's not a war game, it's to say it is to say you don't understand Dave Arneson, in my opinion, just from what he left behind in public. Speaking only on the facts, I think it's not a guessing game. That somewhat clearly understand where he's coming from on many issues. He was a guy who leaned away from this stuff, away from chainmail. So to say what he was doing was chainmail, I think it's false. It's just not true in that way. It is something different, right? In a way, I do see it as slightly insulting to call it this other thing when people have worked and I think achieved making something different. Give people their flowers, as they say, when they've earned it. Don't take it away for a petty agenda that you might have in the hobby. Or an opinion you have, well, fair enough. Say it's an opinion. You want to say that's what it is? I say no. I say you're wrong. And because some of these guys in the Bro OSR, when they mention this stuff, they walk around going, well, we're just telling people what real D&D is. And I'm like, well, it can be your opinion. But if we're going to say who gets to say what real D&D is, I think at the very least, we can look back at the public statements and information left behind by the people that actually made the entire thing and see if they clearly tell us where they stand on any of the issues that we see being argued or debated today. It's not hard. Important supplements, 1975 to 1976. After the original 3 booklets, we get Greyhawk, Blackmoor, Eldritch Wizardry, Gods, Demigods, and Heroes. These added thieves, paladins, a variety of different weapon damages, demons and devils, psionics. You can argue AD&D didn't appear out of nowhere. It grew out of AD&D's supplements. I say that's historically accurate. It's AD&D wasn't just like, oh, we're giving you something new. It's something that developed straight from the previous edition and the further work done. I think that's in many ways a good way to build that next system is through what you do with the old one. So in a way, there's a lot of same. That's why these games mix so well, because it's like AD&D is built off of this. So you can look at a lot of material from OD&D right up to second edition, see that the material can cross over and be used. Not in every case, but in a lot of cases, yes. And you'll hear old school guys constantly talking about this. And for the few that criticize second edition, they at least include that as part of the discussion. Even they agree. Second edition, along with every other TSR edition, is easy to mix about through the different editions in D&D, because they're all built through an evolution instead of I just made something different, right? It's an evolution of old. Sometimes the direction like tournament play can be unique and separate from what should have, in my opinion, evolved, right? Yeah. It is what it is. Why OD&D, Original Dungeons and Dragons, feel so different? Because it's incomplete by modern standards. So it feels different in a way. It doesn't have an answer for everything. There's a lot of DM make it up as you go stuff. Like player says, I want to do this, and you're like, the game doesn't even talk about that. And when you get the question, you think it's like such an obvious thing, like somebody would challenge you on, and you are talking to a fellow nerd, and you're like, what do I do here? Because your mindset as a DM is always see the game as, or whatever's activities are happening as, ways to potentially challenge characters. It is a mindset. It's a principle that's been drilled into you to look at the scene and how does it. And sometimes it doesn't. And to be eased up when there's unnecessary, a push challenge from your end that's just not required. Say with some skills, you can require a dice roll if you think it's worth, there's a chance of failure. If you don't, if you're willing to say for the most part they succeed, you can just say they succeed and move on. No dice roll, but it's a balance act. It's incomplete in the modern standard, dependent on referee authority. That's what I just talked about. Built for campaign continuity. Just so whatever develops just sort of stays along that path, and there's not a lot telling you what to do. It's just extremely lethal. Focused on exploration and treasure. It assumes players are cautious. It assumes this. Death is common. Meat grinder accusations, but the game isn't made to avoid the meat grinder, but it rewards cautiousness. So the idea is the meat grinder is there for if you're not cautious. Get it? Death is common for the players that aren't cautious. So people are going to learn. So you're going to run. What they're saying is the game is you're going to run into character death. Most likely. Relax. That's what's going to happen. Replacement characters are normal in old D&D. Oh man, because even when you do everything right, it's that kind of game, man. You did everything right. Still, I mean, I didn't think the goblin would roll a 20 and then, after you just went down to like 1 hit point, right? Like, I'm sorry, dude. You're dead. This is pre-character arc D&D. So The idea of backstory or backgrounds, it's not much of a concept, in my opinion, at the time. It's not one that people focused on. You just played the cleric and you were like, you, the cleric. In many cases, you develop your characters over time, but at least at the beginning, it does feel a bit more like you're John the Fighter or John the Cleric, right? OD&D is a referee culture, not a rules culture, because the game depended on the referee because it had almost no rules for anything. So for a game to function that says you can do anything and it gives you no rules, that's the TSR group going, dude, it's all on you. And when you read the material, you'll find enough statements where it's hinting that at you, like, you got this? You're like, well, what do I got? We got no rules for like 99% of shit you're going to run into. You don't? No. Good luck. Fuck. It's not like a war game where you would know all that. That's already been figured out. Remember, they're in the middle. When you get D&D, it's almost like you are joining the experiment. In a way, when you join this hobby, you're you're a game tester for the rest of your life. Constantly what we're doing is meant to be evolved on, right? It assumes intelligence over instruction. It was written for people already inside the hobby. So it is, they don't expect the game to get the bigger crowd. You got to understand, AD&D 1, when it was a hit, they were like, that happened? Because they don't have a hit before this, right? There's not a lot of history here to compare things to. And they admit they were surprised at the sales. Sales for AD&D First Edition were awesome. I mean, they were terrific. Like, they blew the whole thing up. It went from, it was a game that could disappear, it was here for a minute and gone, to a game that, yeah, this will be here in 1,000 years. Like, it's established. Like, this thing is going to be so spread, that's with us. That thing is with us. Even if we stop playing it, history will not forget it. And in my opinion, a game like this will always be picked up, even if there is a pause cycle, right? Okay. The dungeon is OD&D is a pressure chamber, a resource drain, a tactical puzzle, a campaign stabilizer. The cultural reality in 1974. No RPG industry existed. No templates existed. No expectations existed. They were inventing level systems, class structures, hit points as characters' durability, campaign continuity, DM authority models. That's why OD&D feels raw, because it is raw. And when they say raw, they don't mean rules as written. It just feels like it's so loose compared to most structured, well-explained games you're going to run into, like where they have a structure of play. This one seems just to say, we got a few things covered, but the rest you're just sort of winging it. Like, yeah. Okay, so you're winging it. Original D&D wasn't a fully formed hobby. It was a prototype that proved that the idea worked. Everything TSR did later, from AD&D to Birthright, grows out of these three staple books. That's why OD&D is so important to the hobby. But it's also interesting to find out the backstory to these things, the facts, what these people really meant when they were pushing this stuff out to the world. The next area we're going to cover is original Dungeons & Dragons, what it did better. It encouraged referee authority more cleanly. Later editions add rules for everything. Add rules for everything. Sorry. Checking notes. Attempt internal consistency. It attempts. It's trying to be consistent. That's tournament play. That's a big push of that. Expand player-facing mechanics. OD&D, it assumed in OD&D, the referee decides. The referee fills the gaps. The referee creates the rulings. That this produced faster table adjudication. Like, just don't going to read the book. I can just tell you whatever I want to say what it is. And if you're going to impress players, they expect consistency with what you do. But you can just do that because the game is expecting you to just make it up. Don't worry, we probably don't have a rule for it anyway at the time. This also produced more table variation, stronger local campaign identity. You could say OD&D trusted the referee more than any edition after it. Later TSR editions still empowered DMs, but they increasingly codified the way this all works. OD&D was a lighter and therefore more adaptable version of Dungeons and Dragons. Again, that's why OD&D, it's hard to not be able to adapt something over from any other edition in the old school. It was structurally simpler, but this is good. I'm saying this is why it's better, what it did better than the editions that came later. So that freedom, I personally think, is more genius than we know. If you have the mind for it, as someone who can run a free game like that, where you don't need your handheld so much to be able to keep things going pretty forward and making things up in your mind and improvising a lot of things. There's a lot of people out there that can do that. And with a bit of structure that the game will give you, that freedom is awesome. And I experienced that with original D&D, being able to do a lot of things that I just, whatever I wanted to do. I understood that, did it right away. So it was structurally simpler. OD&D core, 3 classes, 3 races, basic spell list, minimal skill system, no feats, no build trees. Character generation was quick. Replacement characters were painless. Campaign momentum stayed intact because you could bring new characters in so quickly. Later editions increase options, customization, balance, complexity. OD&D focused on play over build. In OD&D, the character sheet didn't matter as much as the player and their skill to make good decisions, regardless of all of these additional options. What can you do when I give you less? I met that with many DMs that would make me play poor characters. You'd be like, well, what do you mean? Like, but I got to tell you, these guys were really good. They have attitudes because they were really good at what they were doing. If you played their game, you'd really enjoy it. It was an amazing experience I had with each one of these guys. But they have this tight idea of, I want to give you less, put you out in the desert, and see how you handle it. And at one point, you could earn some stuff. But I really want to challenge you with this. Hey, you're a nobody. Nowhere right now. Good luck. Figure out how to get to money if you want all these items. Somebody well off would have all this scare set to them. You're not that person. So, mindset. OD&D, it prioritized exploration over combat balance. Modern editions lean heavily into encounter balance, tactical clarity, combat symmetry. OD&D leaned into risk assessment, retreat, resource management, mapping, light tracking, time tracking. Combat was dangerous. Avoiding combat was intelligent. The dungeon was not built to be fair to you. It wasn't built to make sure it's this tough to meet the level that you're at when you get there. It's not made for you. It's just there. So there might be some rooms that's the room you avoid. It was built to be survived. not win the fight in the same way. It's a survival game. You're surviving the story. It's a very important difference. There is no winning in D&D in the way they say the sense. But what is the end goal for any player? What's the basic end goal? To survive to the end with a character. So survival, once you understand the mindset, it starts letting you see things here a little differently. It was built to be survived. Not just you win the big fight, but survive. Just survival is your victory. OD&D didn't balance encounters. It balanced risk against greed. So many ways to mentally challenge players. You want to go in there to get the loot, or you want to bypass that stuff? It's tricky. It treated the dungeon as a system. In OD&D, wandering monsters, time measured in turns, torches burning out, weight being an issue, weight mattering, what you're carrying, the load you carry, random encounter tables, reaction rolls, moral rules. These created a self-operating dungeon ecosystem, which I covered when I covered dungeons recently. Went into great detail about this stuff. Later editions often downplay moral, ignore time pressure, hand wave, what you're carrying. They don't make it a big concern. Reduce reaction uncertainty. OD&D made those mechanical. This created tension without scripted drama. You're not going to write out the drama. The drama is just going to happen while you play the game. It will develop from these challenging situations. These will create the drama that you're looking for. That's the point. The dungeon in OD&D didn't need a plot. It ran itself. Just run the dungeon. Watch what the players do. You got everything right there. If you do this, you'll understand that. The dungeon in OD&D didn't need a plot. It ran itself. You're the DM doing, this is raw rules as written, dungeon focus. So you do that part properly, and within the limitations, within the challenges, but if you take those away, you start losing a bit of that, right? Fair enough. Hyperborea, 3E RPG for the win. I'm going to talk about 2 OSR games at the end of this, as this is all about supporting the OSR. So I'm trying to teach, especially new people, the history to the stuff, the facts, cover things, go over and go. Here, if you're interested in the OSR, it's good to understand the roots. That's the base games. And then lean that into the OSR stuff. And we'll talk a bit about that at the end of the night. Final couple of subjects I'm going to cover. It was more dangerous. Yeah. I played Beck Me. I played original, Beck Me, multiple versions of basic. I played the AD&D one. I ran all these too. I ended up back at second edition even after taking all the rounds. But I mean, I picked up things from each edition, sort of showing off some of my knowledge tonight. It's all facts. When I state an opinion, I'll make it clear, but I'm covering facts here. Stuff that was straight from Gary and the company. Public statements, everything will check out. You can check me on everything. I expect my nerds will want to do this. So I look forward to it. Go ahead. It will be good. It will be good. It was more dangerous, and that changed behavior. Hit points were low, right? Healing was limited. Death was common in old school OD&D. This forced caution, planning, creative problem solving, hiring retainers, people that could fight with you or just be there to take some gear off you so you can travel freely and be ready for any danger you're going to run into. Negotiating instead of fighting was a thing. Later editions increased character durability, resurrection accessibility, combat survivability. OD&D created fear. Fear creates engagement. the more you're freaked out about what's going on. Like the more you care about what's happening to the point you're concerned, it is a negative situation. So if you're concerned, you'll be worried. That that gets you focused on the game. Hence, engagement, very important for old school. These things really, really could screw with your head. The limitations that you can't just run out and you got to be cautious because everything is dangerous. It was less about character arcs. Later editions increasingly support narrative arcs, backstories, character builds, emotional continuity. OD&D supported campaign continuity, player continuity, world continuity, but not necessarily individual hero arcs. The world mattered more than the character. It doesn't mean the character doesn't matter at all in their own right to your own focus, but what I'm saying is the world isn't, there's nothing in the world going, I'm here because you showed up with this character here and I needed to be here to challenge your character in a specific way. Like the world is just like, hey, I'm a big red dragon. You're like, but I'm only level 2. Are we supposed to fight this guy? No. Why is he there then? Why would we see him? Because the world doesn't care about your level. The dragon was just going to be there. Period. The dragon is in that forest. You're going by it. That's all. And you're just seeing some sense of reality of the world not being adjusted to your character in that way. That produces a different psychological tone. OD&D was about surviving the world. Later editions are often about expressing yourself in it. So who the character is in ways less important than just you can role play as John the cleric or John the fighter. Right? You can be John, but you're still going to talk as John the fighter. You're still role playing you, a character. So the role play is happening, but the idea of building up a separate character from you and developing the character in that way, it wasn't there. Character development would be something assumed, not written into gaming material right away. It is hinted at, pushed at, and strongly, clearly stated later throughout TSR's different editions of D&D. It allowed more organic table evolution because OD&D was loose, host rules forced. Campaigns diverged wildly. Referee culture became local. Later editions aimed for standardization, organized play, consistency across tables instead of DMs doing just exactly what they want, but that was more focused towards tournament play. Right, but they thought they could turn this into some type of more public gaming because there was a lot of people there. They thought that the public gaming might lean into the home gaming at one point. But again, if you understand AD&D, you do know there's a different expectation between tournament and what you do at home. And the game understands that. Gary gets it. So you are given freedom at your home game to not be under the rules as written everything tournament play. So I like to inform people because a lot of people say it's raw rules as written. I'm like, you understand? You read AD&D 1. I ran the game and played it. I put serious time into that. If you know that, then you know that's tournament. And there's really only 30% dungeon and character creation rules that you follow for sure in your home game with a framework of do whatever you want. Right? You can use the optional table. You can change it. You can drop it. You can bring your own rule in. But there's a framework that even they want the home game to have a frame. They did try to do that. But again, tournament play, different than home gaming with AD&D 1. They just had this tournament thing that just never landed and stayed. It never became the thing they wanted. OD&D tables felt unique. You could walk into an OD&D campaign and feel like you were playing different games And that wasn't considered wrong. It was expected. Yeah. Cool. This is all about promoting the OSR. So, boom. I don't want to say what games yet that I'm going to cover. They're pretty straightforward. They're very popular. But they're games that were an update of basic and original D&D. I just want to basically run people through like what is the OSR? What's the evolution of TSR D&D? And again, if you understand this stuff, you can understand OSR a lot better. Might even attract you towards the OSR and playing that game, because in a way, understanding this is to understand that, right? Cool. Okay. Again, you could walk into an OD&D campaigns and feel like you were there playing different games. And that wasn't considered wrong. It was expected. It was mechanically honest about its roots. OD&D never pretended it was experimental. It showed its wargaming DNA, its rough edges, its evolving nature. Later editions polish heavily. Polish increases accessibility but removes visible evolution. OD&D feels alive because you can see its joints. You can see it for what it is. You know the freedom. There's nothing hidden. There's not a secret rule. There's none of that. It's all in front of the players. It's raw in that way. Everything is laid out in front of you because nothing is laid out too much behind the scenes. Right? Again, this is before it's developed. They haven't totally made it into the thing AD&D 1 is going to be. One of those I might cover. I don't want to say which one yet. Save that to the end. Oh yeah, I'm covering all these second edition worlds as well this year in 2026. If you check the lineup of worlds coming up, I'm covering Spelljammer next as a second edition. Oh no, what? That's a lie. No, it is Spelljammer, and then I think it's Greyhawk. Then Greyhawk, right? So Greyhawk is going to be fucking good. I hope to impress the guy who has the Greyhawk channel. So it's all facts. That guy, if he watches it, well, he'll know if I'm right or wrong. It was mechanically honest about its roots. Again, just want to go over this again. OD&D never pretended it was experimental. It showed its wargame DNA. Like I said, the rough edges, the evolving nature. Later editions polish heavily. Polish increases accessibility, but removes visible evolution. OD&D feels alive because you can see the joints. And again, there's no secrets. What it did not do better. For credibility, I'm going to say this. OD&D did not do better at clarity. So I don't want to claim that it did. I'm saying it's quite opposite. It wasn't that clear. It didn't do good on accessibility because it was hard to understand. Like, okay, I get how you do the comic, but what about the rest of this, dude? What the fuck do I do with this? You might think that's going to scare off a lot of people. Organized standardization, rule explanations, player onboarding. They weren't good on these things. They didn't have the rules together. Rule explanations weren't good. Players weren't just on board. Holmes, Mulvey, AD&D, those improved the structure. But raw structural freedom, OD&D wins that category. So when it comes to freedom to do what you want and that producing something great, it wins. That's a successful formula, right? So it actually produces greatness. So they know they're getting something good out of this new thing. That's why they know it's a thing. Star Frontiers, I've heard of that. I know about Western City RPG, Gamma World, White Box. Yeah. OD&D is the most referee-driven edition TSR ever produced. It had to be. It didn't really have a full game. It punished carelessness and rewarded creativity. You being ahead of the game. Not just creative, fast thinking, ready to play, ready to think. It's not minimalist by design, it's minimalist by origin. Later editions refined D&D. OD&D discovered it. Sorry. Well, if you missed the early part of this, I've already went over that, and in the AD&D, when I go over the same thing, went into detail, vast detail already there, Stephen Kennedy, about that earlier. Totally acknowledge Dave Arneson. Actually did a whole section on him. I've done 3 streams now talking about TSR where I do sections on Dave Arneson. And I even described tonight that he pretty much designs the game, as I said earlier, and Gary pretty much puts it together, packages it, and gets it to the market. That's the big push guy. He makes the what if a thing. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to raw structural freedom that produces something good, OD&D wins in that category, realizes that freedom is a valuable thing. OD&D is the most, again, referee-driven edition TSR ever produced. It assumed intelligence instead of explaining everything. And like I said already, it's not minimalist by design, it's minimalist by origin, because later editions refined D&D, OD&D discovered it. Original D&D isn't better because it's older. It's better in specific structural ways. It trusted the referee more, feared death more, and demanded more from the players. Okay, now we are moving on to basic Dungeons and Dragons. That's at least the first bit. Original Dungeons and Dragons covered history, what it was, what I felt it did better, being honest about the areas where it wasn't so good, that later editions do better than it, accessibility, and so on. Dungeons and Dragons basic set, edition by J. Eric Holmes, the Holmes. The Holmes basic set 1977 and why it existed. By 1976 to 77, OD&D looked like this. 3 original booklets, 4 supplements, magazine clarifications, tournament rulings, host rule culture everywhere. It was powerful, but messy. Very true. New players were getting lost. Retailers didn't know how to sell the game exactly. Parents didn't know what they were buying for their kids. What is this saying? There's no common knowledge of what it is at that stage. TSR needed a clean entry point, a self-contained starter, a product that didn't assume chainmail, a clearer identity. Holmes was brought in to organize the chaos. Cool. Yeah, I know a lot of people that run the Hyperborea, the basic fantasy. It's a gimmick with a lot of the older guys. They do enjoy those games. I do my own second edition still, right? But I'm doing 5e soon, which it's just something I promised to do this year. What Holmes actually did, Holmes did not rewrite D&D. He edited and reorganized OD&D material, clarified language, removed dependency on chainmail, standardized the combat system 2D20 resolution, pure theater of the mind, play without the miniatures, hence the D20 resolution that you can do without the figurines. Remember, they're optional, but they're there. They're part of the roots. Holmes Basic only covered levels 1 to 3. Just to clarify, all he covers at the start. Oh, wait, I'm going into the gods and everything, dude. Like, I'm Steven. If you like the basic stuff, I'm covering some cool stuff here. Some very cool stuff. The game directs players towards the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Monster Manual, and eventually the rest of AD&D. So Holmes Basic was a gateway, a bridge, a funnel into AD&D. So from OD&D, this is the middleman, the evolution towards AD&D. This is them taking the Frankenstein that was OD&D, finally organizing it from what they've learned over experience now with it. You might as well say everyone's game testing all the time with the original stuff when they start, because they don't really know what they have. They're not really 100% sure what they have. And it's going to be like, what do we learn over time? Well, this is basic, starts coming out of organizing with the new knowledge they have, right? So again, a gateway, a bridge, a funnel into AD&D. Gary's position at the time. Gary was working on AD&D simultaneously as, and here's the key. Holmes Basic was not meant to replace AD&D. Gary viewed AD&D as, see, this is the goal there. He thought you could keep having other products because he thought he was going to turn Advanced into tournament play, official tournament standard, complete expression of the game in tournament play. The authoritative rule set, when used for tournament play, very detailed. The authoritative rule set, raw rules as written, when used for tournament play. Holmes Basic was an introduction, a simplification, a stepping stone. Gary later made it clear that AD&D was his definitive statement of the game. Holmes Basic wasn't a new direction, it was a doorway. I still don't think the second edition as it was is something he was insulted by, and I think it keeps most of his principles from AD&D 1. It's so similar that it confuses me because I ran both. I've read the material up and down for both editions. I know they're so similar, it's silly. Most of the principles are kept with a few changes. I talked to Gary directly on Dragon's Foot myself. I asked him how he felt about second edition. He never felt like it was an attack on him. Actually, he felt like, yeah, they stuck to a lot of his principles from first edition, which was wise. So I asked him about second edition all the time, and he had no problem talking about it because he still felt his handprint was on that. It was still in many ways his, and at least they listened to him. Unlike the WotC team at the time that publicly did have that negative PR at the time because they decided not to listen to Gary. TSR was still, like, those guys would still take his advice. So he's still talking to guys that are making that. And so you really find out is that was never really made as an attack against him. Though I would imagine some people feel to this day that was. I talked to Gary. I asked him directly because it was something I wonder. Was second edition like a hit on you, dude? He said no. He didn't believe it was. So, and if he said it elsewhere, well, I wouldn't be surprised. Because Gary did have this habit of sometimes, and I hate to say it, just the honest truth, if you look through his statements, he would say one thing one day, something else the next day, right? So it's like, well, which opinion was king, right? Sometimes you don't know. So again, Holmes Basic was an introduction, a simplification, a stepping stone. Gary later made it clear, go over this again, that AD&D was a definitive statement of the game. Holmes Basic wasn't a new direction, it was a doorway. The legal context. Okay. You can't get around some small details on this because it was just so important at the time. The legal context around this period, the dispute between Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson was escalating. AD&D allowed TSR to define a new distinct rule set, limit Arneson's royalties, since royalties were tied to Dungeons and Dragons. This is part of why AD&D becomes structured, codified, authoritative in the rules for the tournament play. Holmes Basic sits in between the loose OD&D era and the controlled AD&D era. AD&D is coming off the end of the trouble he has. So there's a lot of things established that you don't even know for sure if they would have done it if there wasn't this issue over here. But it is what it is. This is the era between those two things. In a way, you almost look at basic as that might have been the way they would have normally went and stuck in that sort of mindset. If it wasn't for this, maybe tournament and authoritative play and establishing something so you wouldn't have these legal troubles, maybe that would not have been the mindset of Gary and the others going forward. But with the trouble, this is what it produces, in my opinion. Okay. The identity shift. With Holmes Basic, something important happens. D&D is no longer presented as a supplement to a miniature game. It's not presented as a war game variant. It is presented clearly as a fantasy role-playing game. Chainmail is gone. Miniatures are optional. The D20 method is standard. So again, they'll assume that most people can't afford the miniatures at the time, very expensive. So a lot of people didn't have these things at their table. So you need the resolution D20 system over the rules for the miniatures for a lot of tables at the time. Okay, so this is a branding shift. The Holmes Basic is where D&D stops apologizing for its wargame roots. So that's important. It stops even trying to explain it away. It is what it is. It knows it comes from somewhere, but it also knows it comes from many different areas. The role play doesn't come from wargaming. The role play comes from, drama class, the stage. There's a bit of that does enter into this system as the entire thing develops. Real character development becomes an issue outside of you just being John the cleric or John the fighter, which was okay with AD&D because the idea of having the separate character wasn't even a concept at the time. This is the Frankenstein experiment, trying to figure out where they want to go before they even started going there. All right, so it's, again, just think about OD&D like you're game testing the whole time. What Holmes himself believed. Holmes was a neurologist, a longtime gamer, more narrative-leaning than strict wargame-focused. His tone in the basic rulebook is clearer, more inviting, less dense than Gygax. He framed D&D as imaginative exploration, cooperative adventuring, fantasy immersion, and this helped broaden the audience. And this is a change. This is so stepping away that you realize outside of the war, there's a bigger audience out here for this than the wargaming itself. So there's a lot of people that the purchasing of AD&D 1 blows up so big, and you don't have a big enough crossover from wargamers to actually have it blow up. It becomes most people, and as I met with many second edition people, ask them what chainmail is. What's chainmail? They don't know. Again, a lot of OD&D people I know that came into the hobby through OD&D said they had to be taught chainmail much later, but they started playing it and they just played it under the D20 resolution, pure theater of the mind gameplay. And that's how they were introduced to the game. And they weren't introduced using miniatures because, again, they were metal. Miniatures becomes a thing in 3rd edition, as I've said many times, because they become plastic and affordable. And 3rd edition leans way more into those miniature gameplay rules on purpose. So WotC makes it affordable and then leans into them. It's something TSR simply couldn't do. So they linked into pure theater of the mind, which was a guaranteed thing you can do if you didn't have a miniature, or you just didn't, you didn't have material around you to use anything you could use here. And they had rules for this. Why this matters historically. Holmes Basic. Standardize the D20 combat system. Removes reliance on chainmail. Marketed D&D to new players. Set the stage for BX and BECME, reinforced that miniatures were optional, also cemented that the idea that D&D is a role-playing game first. Holmes Basic didn't invent D&D. It made it understandable. OD&D was written for insiders. Holmes Basic was written for newcomers. This is where D&D becomes a product, not just a phenomenon. AD&D was Gary's cathedral. Holmes Basic was the front door of this new this new church, this new religion. By 1977, D&D no longer needed chainmail. It needed clarity. Structural timeline. 1974, OD&D 3 booklets. 1975 to 76, supplements expand complexity. 1977, Holmes Basic. 1977 to 79, AD&D core books released. Post 1979, TSR fully positions D&D as a standalone RPG industry. Holmes Basic is the hinge. Original D&D proved the idea worked. Home Basic proved the idea could be taught. So, it works. We can turn all that into something real, structure it, and teach it to people. All details are coming. We're moving on to the God. So this is an area I told you guys about earlier. If you were anybody, starts in and they start right from the get-go on this. So this is basic, from D&D normal character to godhood. Metzer Beckme Arc, the full life cycle version of basic D&D. It's one of my favorite sets. This is one of the things that attracted me back towards basic was these sets of books. I see them; they look so beautiful. The little box sets, all leading up to becoming a god. It was like, oh, really? They do that? Like, yeah. You talk about superhero? No, you can build up towards a god. We're talking about Dungeons and Dragons basic set, Dungeons and Dragons master set, Dungeons and Dragons Immortal set. This is TSR's most ambitious character progression ever published. The basic set, Metzer, 1983, levels 1 to 3, the rib box. This is not Holmes, not Mulvey. This is Frank Metzer's rewrite. What makes it different? Step-by-step solo tutorial. The famous Alina Embargo intros. It's like it's leaning into solo play. No, some beautiful stuff. Clear instructional tone, designed for complete beginners, structured to teach the hobby, not just rules, but philosophy. Strong focus on heroic fantasy, clear dungeon play procedures, pure theater, fully supported, miniature compatible but unnecessary, miniatures compatible but unnecessary. Metzer's Basic is a teaching tool. It assumes nothing. It walks you in. The Master Set, 1985, levels 26 to 36. This is where things change. Now characters rule dominions, command armies, influence nations, fight world-level threats, enter planar-scale conflicts. This is no longer dungeon crawling. This is high fantasy. High fantasy rulership. War scale impact. Epic spellcasting. Reality shifting power. Mechanically, high-level spells explode on scale. Domain rule matures. It matters. Mass combat rules, you will use it. They do get applied through these. There is mass combat. Again, there is a number of resolutions, but you can lean back towards wargaming. This is still In that vein, mass combat rules taken in, characters reshape regions. This is TSR saying, what happens when you don't stop at level 20? AD&D capped progression culturally, basic kept climbing. So what would happen if you went beyond the, man, you're fucking the super wizard, you're this? Okay, you keep going. Now what? What's beyond super wizard? Oh, okay, I see. A god. Maybe. The immortal set. This is the real difference maker. Characters no longer gain levels. They become immortals. Not clerics serving gods, not demigods, actual cosmic entities. They gain spheres of power, energy, time, matter, thought, entropy, reality warping abilities, multiversal travel, cosmic politics, plane shifting influence. Advancement is no longer XP based, it becomes quest and power based. You stop being a mortal adventurer, you become part of the cosmology of everything. You are everything. You are godlike at this point. This was never done in AD&D as a formal progression system. So it's like one of the only times they really tried to venture into this crazy realm, but it's because of that it does make it unique just to want to try it out. The big picture, what BECMI was doing. BECMI stands for Basic, Expert, Companion, Master, Immortal. That's BECMI right there, baby. And yeah, definitely one of the great ones here. It is the only TSR line that starts at level 1, progresses to level 36. The transition into godlike play, it presents a full heroic life cycle. Adventurer, explorer, ruler, world shaper, immortal. No addition before or after carried that ladder in such an explicit mechanical way. Where just it's the aim of the thing to get you there. The difference from AD&D between this. AD&D focused on standardization, tournament play, codified systems, gritty danger at low levels. BECMI focused on myth progression, clear ladder structure, total power escalation, long-term campaign continuity. AD&D feels like a professional game system. BECMI feels like a mythic fantasy Sega engine. As some would say, BECMI has more soul. Just saying. If you're saying Steven here thinks he's one of the best, and a lot of people think this. Accessibility. Mets are basic. Cheap entry, box clarity, all-in-one packages designed for retail shelves. It was TSR's strongest mass market push. And importantly, you could play the entire journey with books, dice, and imagination. No miniatures dependency at this stage. Even at immortal levels. All here. Again, I don't try to take a shot at even the old school guys that got into a lot of miniature use. They start, even if they're doing old school games, the access to miniatures becomes cheaper as WotC turns towards plastic. So during the old school, just the idea that like most public tables, there might be a guy with a miniature that's his character, but he's never going to be on a board or moving it. Just nobody has enough miniatures, and they're quite costly. There was a painting subculture, guys that would collect it. And there were a few war gamers that could have an exceptional amount. And you might see the odd table, right, where they had it. And there were some home groups that definitely had it. The public was the majority of people. And most people, because these are nerds and antisocial people, so a lot of people don't have friends. More people in the hobby don't have friends than do have friends, right? So a lot of people, the only way they game is if they get out and meet a stranger to run the game for them. Back then, you just didn't see much of it. It just was so costly. Why this matters, BECMI is TSR's most complete progression design. the only edition that formalized godhood, the most structured life cycle fantasy system TSR published. If someone asks, which TSR edition let you become a god? The answer is Metzer's Beckme. Fucking love Beckme. Okay, so here's a small part. OD&D Basic, pure theater as functional baseline. Talking about both OD&D and Basic. Both games require a referee describing space verbally. Requires players declaring actions verbally. Resolve combat through tables and dice. Function completely without physical representation. If you do not place figures on the table, the only remaining mode is pure theater of the mind. There just isn't. It's either you play with the miniatures in some theater of the mind, or you play pure, because you don't play with the figurines. There's not 50 ways to do that. It's just these two ways, because the pure just means you stay here the entire time. Everything is imagined because you have no physical representation. That's what it means. You're here the whole time. All right. There is no alternative board state system. No mandatory grid. No required positioning markers. The game is complete without miniatures. That's not style. That's structure. Built-in support without dependency. Now, here's where the nuance strengthens your... Well, this is me writing my own notes. Strengthening my own case. So I'm reminding myself. So I usually get these notes out or just hit over them. So, chainmail, movement in inches, weapon reach, spell areas, facing, marching order. Those elements support miniature use, but they do not require miniature use. The key difference, the rules provide compatibility with figures, but the mechanics do not collapse without them. That's the dividing line. D&D was miniature compatible, not miniature dependent. Again, Gary and them thought it would be a barrier to people coming into the hobby because these things cost so much money. The economic reality. Miniatures cost money. This part is often ignored, but it matters historically. In the 1970s, miniatures were metal. They were expensive. Many teenage players could not afford armies. TSR books were already stretch purchase for some. A dungeon map on graph paper cost almost nothing. A few dice and the imagination were affordable. If D&D had required miniatures, it would have drastically limited accessibility. The game's support for pure theater wasn't just... I hope I wasn't gone long there. That did a reconnect. I hope we didn't lose too much. I'm going to go back over a part just in case, because I think it might have cut out on that. I'm sorry for restreaming, having an error. I hope it's the only one. I hope I'm coming clear through most of this time. We'll go back over this. The economic reality. Miniatures cost money. This part is often ignored, but it matters historically. In the 1970s, miniatures were metal. They were expensive. Many teenage players could not afford armies. TSR books were already a stretch purchase for some. A dungeon map on graph paper cost almost nothing. A few dice and imagination were affordable. If D&D had required miniatures, it would have drastically limited accessibility. The game's support for pure theater wasn't just a philosophy, like it was economically practical. That matters. Clean, direct. It's straightforward. It's so obvious why they had to go down that road, because it was just too costly to get people to, you require this to play the game. Oh, I agree, Stephen Kennedy. 1,000,000% I agree. But that WotC was headed towards miniatures. It was obvious with 3rd edition. I'd even say it was more friendly to miniatures than all old school games. I mean, just as far as leaning into it without shame and almost to the point of less viewing it as less of an option, maybe more of a requirement. Oh, I hear you. I hear you. Just back in the day when I was coming up, many didn't use them. It was common to just everyone did theater of the mind. So it was just so common that when I hear that people, I get people use them today. I get there's even a painting subculture that was happening in the 80s, but the affordability is what really blows it all up, and that comes. Okay, it says I had another connection issue. I hope I'm not glitching out too bad here. I hope I'm good. I'm getting reactions like I am good. Hopefully that is good. Should be no reason. I checked all my connections. Restream. Play nice, please. Play nice. Having a good night. So yeah. D&D and basic. Fully support pure theater of the mind. Allow miniature use. Never require miniature use. Function completely without physical representation. Gary, embrace the wargame roots. Actively shape D&D into a separate role-playing game identity. Like, he embraces the roots. He doesn't hide away from it, but he's still saying, I am not that, right? It's like, definitely I won't be ashamed of it. And we'll definitely, so there is a sense of we appreciate where we come from, but we are not that. Just so important. Did not design it to be a mandatory figure-based game. So D&D just ended up not being focused on the miniatures. It had to be focused on mandating the other way. So if you just don't use the miniatures, you have to do it this way. Because it's not another option, where either you have the physical representation or you don't. In some way, it could be miniatures, could be paper, but if you don't have none of that, you got this. I'll check what Steven's saying in a second. Brace Wargame Roots actively shaped D&D into a separate role-playing game identity. Did not design it to be a mandatory figure-based game. Economically, Theater of the Mind made the hobby accessible. Miniatures increased cost. The rules were written so you did not need to buy more to play fully. So it's just made so you can play it here without needing to purchase more after you've gotten the books and the dice. You can play the game, right? I haven't seen too many of the updated second ed stuff that's out there myself. I've looked into, just because I only have so much time to read some of the OSR stuff, so I read like especially the stuff I'm checking out tonight. I don't want to say it, so sorry. No, shut up. D&D grew out of wargaming, but it did not remain dependent on it. The system supports miniatures, but never requires them. Gary didn't erase the roots. He evolved past them. If you had dice and imagination, you had the full game. Thank you very much, Stephen. I hope you're enjoying tonight. And I really appreciate that. And I love the OSR games you're bringing up. And I mean, I'm thankful for that. I'm showing the chat here. So a lot of people are going to see all these different things and want to go look up what you're saying. I'm very pleased with that you're bringing up. And you're having some fun. I can tell you're making some good comments. Focused here. I appreciate. If I understand what you're asking, I'll try to clearly answer everything, right? So here's where we're going to focus on complaints and my counters to them. So these are complaints about OD&D and basic that I have counters to. Complaint 1, and we're talking about OD&D, 1974 original Dungeons and Dragons. It's incomplete and unclear. This one is constant. Cross-referencing chainmail, contradicting combat systems, sparse explanations, assumes prior wargame knowledge. Counter. Here's my counter. It was not designed as a tutorial product, right? It's not designed as something it's supposed to handhold you and teach you how to use. It was written for active hobbyists. So it expects people that are going to take what they're doing and understand the way, fuck with it, right? Because that's what hobbyists do. They take things and, what do I do with this? And play with it. It's part of learning it, right? Playing with it, tinkering with it, messing with it. So they go towards those people with a game like this. So OD&D functions as a toolkit, a referee framework, a campaign engine. It opens, its openness is not a flaw, it's structural freedom. OD&D doesn't tell you how to play, it tells you how to run a world. It gives you the authority, but it's telling you within the authority there is a framework, and it gives you some guidance on here is the structural stuff, the fighting, the moving things around. Here's what you do with all these things, but at the same time, it gives you freedom within that, just principles, right? It's always good. That's what I learned with second edition. Second edition did this really well. Taught you things without directly teaching you something. It would just you give it a nudge towards there, and you go into the game, and you're like, yeah, right. Oh, chain. You want to know why this? I said this recently. Most wargamers I knew when I was younger that I met in the 80s thought D&D was a crappy game. But they didn't like D&D. They thought it was an elf game, weird. It's like, because they'd hear people even suggesting it was a war game back then. No, it's not. War gamers would be just, no. Your little weenie elf game is not like what we're doing. That was their attitude towards this stuff, right? They had that whole little bit of macho attitude in reaction to, no, your token Lord of the Rings elf fairy game is not what we do. And in a way, it's TSR and Gary's going to learn this over time. They do have a different audience. Like, it doesn't mean war gamers. Some war gamers don't like this. Some do. But if a lot of guys who might be into wargaming, it doesn't mean they'll be into the fantasy and the role play. That's just Gary and them have a expansion of things they can like and they'd be interested in. There were some other wargamers that followed them, but I still think the majority of the old school were people outside of that nerd wargaming circle. Just my opinion, only because I just experienced so many people not knowing that stuff. And I'm figuring they're coming in through a completely different means. Maybe I'm wrong. Okay, so complaint number one, the incomplete and unclear. I think that structural freedom is important. I think the game is actually trying to really acknowledge that. So that is a real thing. And when you say it's incomplete and unclear, that was not the intention of the designer, right? They purposely did not see it as completely incomplete. It's freedom. I'll be covering Gamma World. I'll cover Hyperborea. I will. I'll do it this year during one of my side order ones. So I do have it in the list because I know so many guys like. I've heard Hyperborea so much. It's just taking time to read some of it. So when I do one of these streams, I can know what I'm talking about, which is what I think you expect me to know when I open my mouth about that game. So I'm going to try my best to make sure I'm qualified to talk about it by the time I do. But I do want to do it this year. So it is a game I have in the line. Complaint number two. There are barely any character options. 3 classes, 3 races, minimal spell list. Counter. This is my counter. That simplicity accelerates play. That simplicity, you're focusing on less, so you're doing more. It is that simple too. Less to read, less to you got to decide what am I running. Like it's more. You need to be more active in moving your character, doing things with your character. So it accelerates play, fast character creation. The game is so simple, it takes you a moment to make a character. You're done. And it will feel that fast once you know the game, right? Fast replacement, and that means fast replacement after character death. So to replace a character that's died in the game is quite easy. Early D&D, they didn't have this, you have an emotional attachment to your character gimmick. It is a game. Like, you got to understand that's the mindset. It's a game. They don't think of you getting your feelings hurt. That is really not part of the designer's mindset. Remember, this is the experimenting stage before they know people that can connect and do all this stuff through this type of gaming and being in the imagination and playing with your mind. Before they know this, the game is just a game. Character death is no big issue. It is to a degree later, and I'm going to cover character death tonight. I have a whole section on character death, so that it wasn't that there wasn't an important conversation even back in the old school. There was. Don't think just what you're hearing today is the only thing said that were like up and down about character death. Old school covered this too. There were debates and arguments, the whole 9 yards. So again, 3 classes, boom. Simplicity accelerates faster character creation, fast replacement after death. Focus on player decisions, not builds. That's what I'm saying. There's less looking at the character. You got less options. Now it's, dude, what are you doing? And when the player says what they're doing, that can decide if the character dies or lives. What the character does. So now it's more pressure on the player to make decisions that lead to success outcomes, especially under certain conditions, right? AD&D assumes player skill, character build depth. So before 2nd edition and TSR understanding that they're going to open up to a wider crowd, at one point there is a expectation that you're competitive in this, that gaming is all serious to you. They just expect people that wouldn't take this serious probably wouldn't give this the time of day to do this stuff. And maybe that common sense makes sense to me, right? There's a lot to understand, put together in your head. They might think people that want to go play a simple board game, like rolling the thing, or in today's modern world, playing video games, wouldn't want to do something this tedious and process, right? But as soon as player skill, character and not character builds, right? Later, option bloat slows the loop. That's later, like into WotC and whatnot, and even in TSR to a degree. Complaint number 3, combat is primitive and messy. Multiple combat systems. Saving throws oddly structured. Attack matrices. Counter. Combat is intentionally diddly and quick. The focus isn't tactical optimization, it's survival. AD&D rewards avoidance, negotiation, clever problem solving. Combat is a risk, not a balanced sport. So in a way, this might sound really weird. The game initially isn't really about combat, though you would swear it is. A lot of things seem to be built around combat. The experience points, the whole 9 yards, but in a way, especially early on, a lot of it is avoid combat. And realistically, that makes sense. And they were all about, here's the secret. Why would they be that way? D&D, outside of the fantasy, was in the wargaming sense. This is where wargaming still carried on with, like, the roots of it still carry in. Simulating reality beyond the fantasy. Right? That's simulating reality. So likely, if it's real, the dragon isn't there to match your level. Right? So combat isn't the focus. Surviving is. That's why combat in itself, if you avoid almost every encounter you're going into, you could be quite successful in a D&D game. You might think that's not D&D. Well, depends on what edition you're playing. Because some editions, it is D&D. Right? Avoid, avoid, avoid. Complaint number 4. It relies too much on the referee authority. Counter. Yes, and that's the design. The referee is authority. AD&D assumes trust, table cohesion, local campaign identity. It produces unique tables instead of standardized experiences. That's a feature, not a bug. So the thing you're saying is a problem is they don't see it as a problem. They think it's actually, they built that on purpose to do that. Basic D&D, BX, and Metzer. We're talking primarily Dungeons and Dragons basic. So I want to focus on this. Now we're to the basic. Complaint number 1. It's too simple, very similar to AD&D. No skill system, limited classes, fewer customization paths. Counter when it comes to BECME. Basic. Its strength is procedural clarity. Procedural clarity. So now you understand better what to do. It explains it better to you. It clarifies things that it never even tried to talk about before. Basic has clear dungeon turns, clear reaction rules, clear moral rules, clear exploration structure. It runs smoothly. Many OSR designers argue BX is the tightest mechanical TSR edition ever made in that sense. Complaint number 2, when it comes to BECME, it's too lethal. Low HP, save or die, swingy outcomes. Counter, lethality changes behavior. Players scope carefully, hire retainers, people to help them, plan exits, think before charging in. The game rewards caution and intelligence. The tension the fear creates engagement, as I explained earlier. Complaint number 3, classes are unbalanced. Cleric strong, magic user fragile early, fighter straightforward. Counter, balance was not primary design goal. Asymmetry creates distinct roles, different growth arcs, different experiences on purpose. Party interdependence. This person really only does the thing that you can't do. You need them. Balance, and that's team sport. Balance in TSR basic is not symmetrical per level. It's just not important. We'll put it that way. Not important. The truest statement I can say on it. Complaint number 4. It's outdated compared to modern RPGs. No feats, no tactical grid emphasis, no build trees, no narrative mechanics. Counter. That's intentional minimalism. Basic prioritizes speed, clarity, table imagination, rulings over rules. It avoids mechanical density so the table drives the story. The big difference in criticism, AD&D complaints usually center on vagueness, chaos, lack of clarity. Basic complaints usually center on simplicity, lethality, lack of customization, and counters are mirror images. AD&D looseness versus freedom. So it means it's a good thing. What's criticized is producing something ironically good. Basic simplicity. For basic, it gives you precision, right? So for all the complaints about these things being simple, being this, they happen to ironically produce something really good. And that's the thing the designers are noticing compared to the complaints. And I think these are pretty good counters to those complaints. And those are, AD&D critics say it's unfinished. Supporters say it's alive. Basic critics say it's shallow. Supporters say it's elegant. One of the best. Neither system was trying to be modern. They were trying to be functional campaign engines. And they were. Simple as that. They achieved their goals. You can't deny it. They had their own, in that way, they had their own experience to offer, right? Okay. All right. So that's the end of covering basic and original from TSR. Now I'm going to cover 3 very important topics. This is general from Gary and TSR about character death, their thoughts on player versus player. And then we're going to look at the truth and facts around the alignment system. Not a debate, Not my opinions. We're just going to look at the facts. Gary Gygax on Danger and Consequences. Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Master Guide. The 1E DMG is the clearest window into Gary's philosophy. Gary repeatedly emphasizes the game must be challenging. Geez, I don't know how many videos where I say it's all about challenging. The game is all about challenging players. I keep repeating it. This is one of Gary's staples. I've known about it forever, and I agree with it. The referee must be impartial. Regardless of authority and power, you must be impartial. Poor decisions have consequences, of course. You got to be fair, but then you got to be so fair that when failure comes, you let it happen. No fudge, no hide. Let poor decisions have consequences. The world is not scaled to the party. Again, the red dragon can be in the forest, and you're not meant to fight him. He's just there because he's supposed to be there, not because the world adjusts to your level in the game. There's a real sense of the world, regardless of fantasy. And there's a simulation of that real that comes from the mindset of people designing the game and playing the game. It's simulating realism on a certain scale. And it just doesn't concern itself. It says, look, there's no need to balance the fights because you're not here to fight. Like, you can fight. You might have to fight. But you're here to survive, not fight. So we don't worry about balancing the fights because you're meant to avoid most of them. So gameplay matches the common sense of the mindset. If we don't care, well, how would you survive instead of just running out the well, this is how you do it, right? And it rewards that gameplay. He warns DMs not to protect players from their own mistakes. Let it happen. He criticizes coddling players, adjusting outcomes to avoid loss, removing danger for emotional comfort. As do I. His stance can be summarized this way. If the risk of death is removed, the game loses meaning. I have several videos out there, and that was my main argument to it. It's ultimate failure, and without the threat of that failure, your achievements don't mean much. And when you achieve something under the conditions of the extreme threat of that failure, that's when those achievements, the way you feel, what you go through, it's something that can't be recreated where the threat doesn't exist. There's just not a replacement, even though people try. It just doesn't work. A false threat is never going to be as impactful as a real one. A failure to the extreme. His stance, again, can be summarized. It's the risk of death is removed, the game loses meaning. This wasn't cruelty, it was structure. To Gary, danger created tension. Tension, the threat of death, created engagement and focus and caution and being in it, playing. AD&D era, 1974 to 76, early D&D assumed characters would die. Replacement characters were normal. Again, this is the mindset before they consider attaching themselves to characters. Like the whole idea of developing a character, it's not even there for people. Like they're actually okay with playing in this sort of brutal character death way because it's not seen that way. It is still just a game. Now, players might run multiple characters. Hirelings would die frequently. There is no tone of tragedy around death in the text. So it just treats death like it's a game in that way. It's mechanical. It's expected. It's part of the campaign churn. The early hobby culture treated character death like losing a piece in a war game. That's true. Learning through failure. Oh, you failed. Try again. Was the big issue. Improving strategy. Not like losing a novel, main character. Because it was a game still. There was no lean towards us. Cool. Resurrection and the safety valve. TSR D&D includes resurrection magic. Raise dead, resurrection, reincarnation, but they're limited. They cost resources. They reduce constitution. They can fail. Resurrection is not narrative immunity. It's a high-level reward and resource sink. So you've lived to a high level. You have the means to get brought back. You've earned that. That likely to be brought back early under the same conditions might be impossible to have such resources to get for people to bring you back to life. The presence of resurrection does not indicate anti-death design. It indicates high-level campaign continuity tools. So it's not to take the threat away. It's just saying the threat is there, and it will still in many ways be there, but there's an opportunity that you might be able to come back under the right means with the right resources. Tournament play culture. TSR convention modules were often brutal. Example, Tomb of Horrors. These were designed to test player skill. Character death was a scoring factor, a sign of miscalculation, part of the competitive structure. This reinforced the culture that death, challenge, consequence. Death equals challenge, consequence. So it's a fail. It's considered failure. It's not considered death in the way like real death, right? It's still just in game mode. Death, design failure. TSR staff tone beyond Gary. So this is from the staff. While Gary was the loudest voice, TSR-era design culture consistently reinforced lethality at low levels, stayed true. Saber die mechanics, true all through all, even the second edition. No encounter balancing, wandering monster pressure, environmental danger. Even basic D&D, BX Menser, keeps high lethality, maintain more rules, preserves random encounter danger. There was no eternal TSR push to eliminate character death. The conversation simply wasn't framed that way. The assumption was the world is dangerous, survival is earned. It's almost like death is expected. It's hard to survive. The core TSR philosophy. You can distill TSR era thinking into this. Death enforces caution. Caution encourages player skill. Player skill defines mastery. Mastery defines long-term survival, that you make good decisions. Remove death, and the skill loop collapses because you build the skills up to counter the thing. When the thing goes away, there's nothing to counter. It's as simple as that. It's saying all the player skills themselves, many of them are for good decision making and good gameplay in this type of game. You take death away, the threat of death, the incentive to play that way goes away in the process. Okay. So Gary saw D&D as a game first, a challenge, a test of judgment, not a collaborative storytelling exercise. That distinction matters. Why this became a later debate. The push against character death as norm largely emerges as this comes about. 1990s narrative forward design. Story first, play culture. Character arc, emotional investment. Modern streaming culture, expectations. This is not TSR era design thinking. So even in second edition, character death is somewhat expected because it should be challenging to survive. It doesn't mean you expect to be an elite grinder. It's just that the game says, relax. No matter about all these things, we still view it as a game. So, as an old DM, I'm not someone who goes in to tell a story emerges. I go in with the mindset I'm running a game, and people play the game expecting to play a game. That's the mindset they go in with. And that's TSR thinking. It's WotC thinking and story-driven ideas that become a reason to focus on things that might say character death is bad, where it just isn't in the mindset of TSR because it's a game. So character death is just failure. That's all it is. That's the whole mindset right there. It's why old school people will blow it off, why new school people make it a big concern. Character death is so concerning to them because they're collaborative storytellers. We just play a game together in the old school, and a story emerges from what we do. We just don't focus on it. That's all. And so it's just a big difference of mindset approach, right? In TSR D&D, death wasn't a failure of the system. It was proof the system was working. Let me say that again. In TSR D&D, death wasn't a failure of the system. It was proof the system was working. Gary believed danger gave the game its meaning. Early D&D didn't protect characters, it tested players. If death wasn't possible, survival wasn't earned. So the threat needs to exist for you to earn that thing. And the feeling of earning that thing is amazing. And it's something you can't repeat when the threat's not there, I believe. So that was TSR's take on character death at the time. Was there some thought around it? Yes. But this is why it never became the issue it is today back then. And it's why old school guys that play TSR D&D or even the OSR clones, you'll notice them blow off this topic like it's not a big issue. Because in reality, yeah, to them, it isn't a big issue. And that's by design. That's the way their game that they prefer functions. It's meant to be in that way. Okay. Player versus player. How did Gary and TSR view this whole topic? OD&D era, 1974 to 76. PvP was assumed possible. In early D&D, alignment mattered. Law versus chaos especially. Mixed alignment parties were common. Henchmen could betray. Hirelings could desert, leave you. Charm spells could be used on PCs. Assassination rules existed. There was no prohibition against attacking another character. The rules treat PCs as actors in the world, not protected party members. PvP was not framed as toxic. It was framed as situational. In early campaigns, Blackmore and Greyhawk, factional tension and character rivalry were not unusual. Gary's view in AD&D First Edition. The clearest guidance appears in Advanced D&D Dungeon Master Guide. Gary and in the 70s, Gary emphasizes the DM must maintain order at the table. That's your managing the table and the experience. Players should cooperate. Of course they should. Alignment conflicts should be handled carefully. Doesn't mean they're not there. It's be cautious from both the game master or the DM and the player's end. Intra-party conflict can destabilize campaigns. Acknowledge that it can do this. Don't pretend that it can't. That's why if you're willing to do PvP, you do it under conditions, limitations, and the players are as careful with it as the DM is to allow it to be managed into the game. Inter-party conflict can destabilize campaigns. Don't pretend it can't. You're not immune. He does not outlaw PvP, but he warns that unchecked player conflict can destroy group cohesion. And in a team sport where that group needs to work together, that can be death to everyone. That's important. Gary believed the campaign was primary. Anything that destabilized it should be moderated on both the end of the DM and the player should feel a responsibility to make sure that doesn't derail by not just doing willy-nilly what they want, by understanding they need to apply limitations, and they have to understand that if they don't, it can turn into this. Don't think you're beyond it. Don't. So PvP can exist with caution, with people that want to do it right. Like it's for the flavor of the game. It's for dealing with something. It's not because the characters have an issue, but it's not because players have to hate each other in the process. The alignment system. Okay, last of these three areas before I hit on the OSR stuff. The alignment system, what the public records actually show. One, Original D&D 1974 is a 3 alignment faction model. And then in magical D&D, alignment is presented as law, neutrality, and chaos, with creatures listed under those headings. It's closer to the which cosmic side are you on? Than a modern personality test. Let me say that again. It's closer to a which cosmic side are you on than a modern personality test. OD&D also treats alignment as practical and world divider. Alignment languages show up early in text printings. Bottom line, OD&D alignment is, if you're comparing it in simple fashion, it's simple. It's really straightforward and simple. It's not hard to understand, but also under explained. So the tables themselves, like if you went to the tables, they would give you more clarity on the differences between them. For the most part, very, very simple alignment system on purpose. Remember, simplicity is the aim of old school. Very simple in their approach to a lot of things. So, sorry to be a little confusing there. Gary 1976 says, yes, we muddied it. And he splits the concepts. In 1976, Gary writes that many DMs were treating lawful good and chaotic evil. And he says that's scarcely surprising. So the way they were treating the alignments was shocking to him. Like them looking into it, it was surprising. The scarcity, like the ignoring of the effects of alignment should be having on the game. So he notices in a lot of games they're not using them. Given the wording of the original books, then admits his own thinking evolved. And that Greyhawk added more confusion. So he's understanding the details going into the alignment system are already confusing people. And they're going to make changes with Greyhawk, which confuses more. It doesn't just confuse, it contradicts, right? He then lays out a clear framework. Law versus chaos are not the same as good versus evil. You can have chaotic good and lawful evil. This yields 5 alignments: lawful good, lawful evil, chaotic good, chaotic evil. And neutral, this is the smoking gun for this, right? My own little note. Yes. Gary says early wording caused mix-ups. So when it comes to the alignment system, you don't just see the debate happening because people are all trying to claim they had the right story. TSR never put out one thing. They put out contradicting pieces of alignment. Things that would contradict each other. So if you experienced it here, that's what it is to you. And that's what it was, written by TSR. But you could find other stuff where it's like, it doesn't. And Gary admits that, openly admits, causes more problems. Holmes Basic 1977 adopts 5 alignment model. Holmes Basic describes characters as lawful, good or evil, neutral, or chaotic, good or evil. And it supports lawful good, lawful evil, chaotic good, chaotic evil. Neutral is just neutral. This is before you get to the chaotic neutrals. So now basic and original are already not presenting the same thing. So understand, the alignment system now is different in both presentations. It's not the same thing. It doesn't even seem like an evolution. It seems like a change, right, of the thing. So the wording becomes contradicting of each other. So to say this is what alignment is, it does get a little confusing. It almost depends on what edition, I guess you want to say, you're talking about alignment in. So AD&D 1 formalizes 2 axis grids, 9 alignments. AD&D pushes alignments into a more systematic, ethical model. Law, chaos, and good and evil are separate axes, and it becomes tied into big setting metaphysics, outer planes, outsiders, etc. This is also where Gary gives stronger definitions of good and evil as ethical principles. This is a different use case than OD&D's simpler side model. So again, this is a whole new approach to alignments right here. BX Basic 1981 reverts the 3 alignments, but explains them better Mulvey basically presents law, neutrality, chaos again, with some guidance and example. So TSR now has AD&D with 9, basic BX with 3, running in parallel. That alone guarantees confusion in the hobby because TSR alignment is not one thing. So was alignment straightforward? Mechanically, it depended on which TSR line you were playing. OD